Alrighty, time to talk about the Ukraine war again, but not on, battlefield, towns being captured and such, and the lines being moved. Again, I don't think I'm going to be talking about that for a long time, so I feel like I have to, since I made that big video talking about, hey, this is the last time I'm going to talk about Ukraine, I feel like I have to preface it with that, just like I did the last video where I mentioned Ukraine. I want to give my 2 cents on this whole dirty bomb discussion that's been flying about. Since the beginning of the war, pretty much, the West, as we know, has been saying that the Ruskies are going to use nukes. They're going to nuke Ukraine, and then NATO will have to intervene, because Ukraine is a NATO ally and all. Oh, wait, they're not. Well, it's never really been explained why, if the Ruskies used nukes in Ukraine, why that would concern NATO. I guess because of the dust cloud that might fly and land and harm NATO countries, which obviously is a big problem when it comes to nuclear bombs, but I've always countered that personally by saying, well, that the Ruskies are under just as much threat from nuclear dust cloud as the West is, because Ukraine is right there next to both of them. But frankly, over here in America, which is the real NATO, without the United States, you don't really have NATO. And in fact, if NATO wanted to have NATO without the United States, they're welcome to. Please do. But they don't want that because they know that it is the U.S. military that is the real NATO. And so we over here would not be affected one way or another by the nuclear dust cloud. And so as far as I'm concerned, I'm still not going to risk the annihilation of the planet over the Ruskies nuking Ukraine. But again, I never thought that they would do that to begin with. But now we're hearing talk again that the Ruskies are going to do this, that they're going to stage a false flag, because the Ruskies are talking about the West or Ukraine staging a false flag, and in the form of a dirty bomb. And for those of you who haven't heard of dirty bombs, this was a phrase that we heard talked about a lot back in the post 9/11 era. That we were told that the Al-Qaeda was going to detonate a dirty bomb, and we were told how how easily one van with a dirty bomb parked in front of the White House could take out not only the president, the vice president, but the Supreme Court and all of Congress in one blast. With that, there would be a total decapitation of the United States government. And if it was so simple, I don't know why Al-Qaeda never tried it. I saw the CGI, rendering of it on the History Channel way back when. And now it's the Ruskies who are warning that it will be the Ukrainian government who is going to detonate the dirty bomb using a bunch of nuclear waste, which, kind of makes sense. Ukraine does have plenty of nuclear waste lying around, and they don't have an actual nuclear weapons program, so a dirty bomb is something that they are theoretically capable of using. Just as an aside, that bit before about the CGI rendering from the History Channel, that was a joke. So I don't want anybody to take that too seriously. I was just going to let it go, but you know what? Sometimes I think I'm a little too deadpan, and people can think that I really am just that much of an idiot. Anyway, the idea, because of course if this actually happened, it would instantly unquestionably be blamed on the Ruskies in all of Western media, and there really isn't much of a pro-Western faction or pro-Russian faction in Western media. You have some skeptical people, maybe on Twitter, who are not overtly pro-Russian, but they're a little skeptical of our own elites. But for the most part, you will hear, universal condemnation of Russia if there's any kind of dirty bomb that is detonated, and this will be used as, I guess, sort of the Horn of Gabriel to signal the NATO invasion of Ukraine. The 101st Airborne, we're told, is ready. They're training in Romania as we speak. to take on the Ruskies in Ukraine as soon as they're given the order. It's almost like they're expecting to join the war in Ukraine any day now, which kind of, I think, supports the Russian narrative that this would be a Ukrainian operation to try and drag in the West and NATO, or rather give NATO an excuse to join the war. And so if I'm trying to balance things right now, because let's just, I shouldn't even say take for granted, but accept, because this is the fact, both the West and the East are fans of false flags. They've both used false flags and deception and diversions and proxy wars. They use the same tactics throughout the Cold War. Neither of them, I think, are above this. And so once I've got that out of the way, it becomes a question of who has more of an incentive to do this at this time. Do I think that the Ruskies have a real incentive to try to frame the Ukrainians for using a dirty bomb, which would, of course, justify a nuclear escalation on the part of the Russians against Ukraine? No, because I still don't think it is ever going to be in Russia's interest to use nuclear weapons in a country that is right next to them and like 300 miles from their capital. I don't think that the Ruskies have developed, unless there's something I'm unaware of, a protocol or a technology to prevent the detonation of a nuclear weapon from having negative effects on the environment or the surrounding areas. Even a small nuclear weapon, low-yield so-called tactical nukes, I think they still have a dust cloud that's going to blow somewhere, and radiation is going to rain down on somebody. And when you're talking about detonating a nuke in a former Soviet republic, there's a good chance that a lot of that radiation could rain down on people in Russia, let alone these new territories which have been annexed by Russia that were formerly a part of Ukraine. And so, presumably, this bomb would be detonated somewhere near where the fighting is going on. And so it doesn't make any sense to me at all that the Ruskies would want to use nukes. And I don't think that the West wants to either. I mean, I don't think that the West wants to start a nuclear war, because hopefully they understand that would mean certain death. There are some people like Mike Pompeo who don't believe that. Mike Pompeo is a crazy person who should never be anywhere near the White House. He should have never been the Secretary of State. But I think he is of the opinion that, hey, yeah, if we have a nuclear war, sure, it might kill 90% of the human population, but at the end, the U.S. would win because we have more bombs and our bombs are bigger or something. So outside of people like Pompeo, who I think are the exception, I don't think that Western leadership wants a direct nuclear conflict. But a dirty bomb would be, it might not be enough of an excuse, but it would be an excuse for the U.S. to say, you know what, this is getting out of hand. We need to go put boots on the ground to stabilize the situation. Kind of like Bosnia or Kosovo or whatever. I think that the U.S. would probably want to take that kind of a stance. Although even back then, the U.S. wasn't overt. They weren't overtly anti-Russia in their stance. They just sort of ignored the Russians and pretended that they didn't exist. Here, the U.S. would be directly confronting the Russians, and at that stage, they would say, essentially, go on, Russia, nuke us. You take that first step. And at that stage, I actually would be worried about the Russians taking that step, because that would be seen very much, I think, by the Ruskies as a direct threat, as one step away from the U.S. invading Russia, which probably would end up happening if the war continued. And so at that point, I think I could see the Ruskies detonating a tactical nuke to take out, an American encampment inside Ukraine. After all, look what happened with Nord Stream. the U.S., I think most people accept, is responsible for what happened to the Nord Stream pipelines. That was an overt act of terrorism. And so I could see the U.S. at this stage accepting, or maybe, conspiring, or at least giving a nod to the Zelensky government detonating some kind of dirty bomb in a way in which it wasn't totally obvious, on its face which side did it, to where maybe it was against some kind of target. Maybe they don't go in and detonate a dirty bomb over a bunch of Russian troops, where it's obvious that, okay, well, the Russians are the ones who were killed by this, so it must have been Ukraine who did it. Maybe they blow up this dam with a dirty bomb and irradiate the water. That would be one way to make this conflict go nuclear without actually having to nuke anybody directly. And then maybe the U.S. could use that and say, no, we have to step in. This is getting out of hand. The Russians staged a nuclear false flag. The next stage is they're going to start, dropping nuclear warheads, on the European continent. We can't have that. And so the U.S. has to step in and be a force for good. And all of these lines that we hear about, they have a responsibility to protect. And then we very quickly escalate towards an end-of-days scenario. So at this point, based on what we've seen, based on the Nord Stream stuff, based on the report, the news reports about the 101st Airborne overtly saying, hey, we are training right now to go fight Russia and Ukraine. We're ready at a moment's notice to go to Ukraine and fight the Ruskies. It seems like the U.S. is planning to fight Russia. That doesn't mean that it's a 100% thing that they're going to do that, but they've already shown that they're willing to use acts of terror in this war in order to try and further their interests, i.e., blowing up Nord Stream was a way of severing Russia's ties with Germany for good. And so now, a dirty bomb blowing up another piece of infrastructure. Let's say this dam in Kherson, I think that's how you say it. I'm still not comfortable saying that name. But anyway, that dam that they've been talking about, blowing that up with the dirty bomb and then saying, oh, we'll see, it was dirty bomb, Russian false flag. I see this more as fitting the Western narrative than the Russian narrative. I don't think that the Russians have anything to gain from a false flag dirty bomb attack. And some of you might say, well, that's exactly why they'll do it, because it's not obvious. And no, it still doesn't help them. So let's hope nothing comes of this. I hope that this is all just talk, that this is just the Ruskies saying stuff, or that if there's any truth to this, that the people who are plotting it back down. Because I can't see any good way that this goes. No matter, if this were to happen, I think that any of the potential paths forward are very, very bad, and most of them lead to Armageddon. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.